what I do in these graphs are just show shapes. Forget figures. Shapes. Okay, that's the dot-com bubble, growing and collapsing. I'll give you these later so you can put them on your kit. That's the dot-com bubble. You can NASDAQ. Okay, it 5 times what it started out at. It booms within 2 or 3 years and then it collapses. I'll stay here and I'll come back. Right. That is the bubble in asset-backed securities. This is lending to mortgage people and other and credit cards, etc., and then bundling it up and making it into an investment commodity. That too, funnily enough, booms by 5 times over the decade. That will come to was one of the key causes that detonated the crisis. But there are deeper causes. So you can see that. Okay. Next, commodities. It's a black line, so it's hard to follow, but it follows roughly the same thing. 5 times. Oil, wheat, lean hogs, as you can trade them on the Chicago Board of Trade. All 5 times asset bubble. But then, I'm afraid my graph goes a little bit indistinct, because what happens here is that assets invested in hedge funds go up 10 times. This is not just in your lifetime. This is since you left university. This is whatever you were doing in 1997. I always say this is since this life stopped being on the television. This is so recent. Okay, this is since Ross and Rachel got a divorce. 10 times goes up the assets invested in hedge funds. And the assets invested in something called credit default swaps go up from 1 billion to 56 billion. Sorry, I'm wrong. 1 trillion to 56 trillion. So that's my graph. And let's call it this, it's notional. Because actually, it would just be a long, sort of pin-shaped graph actually. So I think I've established that we're in the middle, or at the end, of an era of asset price inflation. This is what's been happening. Now,
it's like champagne of the economy.
Booming,
Bubbly.
Everything goes up. And if you can ride that, if you can get on the escalator at the bottom, you become rich. This is where the 4x4s come from in every city in the world. Somebody has been involved in property, in .com, and got off at the right time. Now the question is, I say that was driven by debt. But the question then is, where does the cheap debt come from? And this explains why it is a global crisis. There's a debate among economists as to whether it's Americans borrowing too much or Asians saving too much. Now let me give you a quiz. Which one of those explanations do you think the American government agrees with? Yes, it is not that difficult to work out. The American government, Ben Bernanke, believes it is because Asians save too much. That's the whole problem. Now, I think both are true. America became addicted to consumer debt. For 20 years, China has allowed the West to live partially a crisis-free and inflation-free lifestyle because China decided that it would grow through export-led growth, which means that Chinese people do not consume most of what they produce. And as a result, and also as a result of the fact there is no welfare state in China, what they do is they save huge amounts of what they earn. So that even a factory worker earning 70... Who's that?
It's Nokia.
That's good. Even a factory worker earning £70 a month saves about £30 of that wages. What they spend it on are healthcare when they're sick and education, even primary and secondary education for their kids. Now, this of course creates a massive imbalance in the world. America imports things. China exports them. America lives on consumer debt. China lives on consumer savings. Consumers save things and they don't spend things. America's national debt is high. China has a national surplus. America imports capital from the rest of the world, including China. Amazingly, they do. Even though they export capital to build factories, they import more from the Chinese savings system. China exports capital. Martin Wolf, famously from the FT, says, capital runs upstream from the poorest to the richest. Now, there's a whole bunch of other graphs. I won't bother walking up and down and showing them you, but basically, as a result, the US trade deficit has rocketed 5 times in that period since Ross and Rachel get a divorce. China's dollar reserves rocket. So there's this huge imbalance, and yes, what it does is it pumps cheap money into the world. It pumps it into the world economy. And what's the effect of that on the Adam Smith scale, supply and demand? If there's a high supply for something, its price goes down. Just translating this into sort of economics 101, what that means is that credit becomes cheap if there's a lot of savings in the world and they need to be spread. This is true, but I just don't buy there's the American economics thing that it's all the fault of the Chinese. Because you have to ask yourself then, you know, how come that it caused the crisis? Since it was causing, for 20 years, relatively benign growth conditions. How come this suddenly causes crisis? Let's just recap, because I know that economics can be challenging, and I'm challenged by it. I'm not an economist, I'm just a journalist. I have to go through these things again and again until they get into my head. Low interest rates because of oversupply of credit equals rising debt in the USA. USA uses debt to smooth growth and make everything nice for people. Lots of cappuccino bars. Then, the dot-com bubble bursts. The first of these bubbles, people rush to try and go into other bubbles. And one of them is this one, that red line, if you remember I showed you, the asset-backed securities bubble. People want to be able to create a market for debt that allows rich investment bankers to gain high profits while the savers who are providing the debt, i.e. people who actually provide the money into the financial markets, which is you and the Chinese peasant, remain sort of on low interest rates. And the question they ask themselves is, where do we find people where do we find people who in a low interest rate world are prepared to pay high interest rates, so that when we lend them this low interest rate money, we can get high interest rates back? Because who would do that? I mean, if you can look at the world economy and say interest rates are low because credit is abundant, why would you ever voluntarily pay high interest rates? And they looked around the American economy, and they looked at the Ross and Rachels of this world, and they thought there's not enough of them. There's not enough young 20-somethings trying to buy their first flat. Where you find people who are prepared to pay high interest rates is in downtown Detroit. You find them, the people who live in those houses in The Wire, the ones who, are, aspirational enough to want to own a small house in downtown Baltimore, go to their bank or their mortgage company, and they have to pay high interest rates because they are mainly working class, poor, black and Hispanic. And Wall Street looked at the American developing market and said that is where you get high-risk borrowers, and subprime was born. And if you don't believe me, I mean, there is an excellent account of this in Gillian Tett's book. Don't just buy mine. Gillian Tett's book tells it like it is. I quote her in my book. Basically, the high-risk mortgage team, aka subprime, at Bank of America, met in the coffee queue the people who were trying to work out how to grow this magic trick of high interest rate